How to get your solution successfully tested. In this video, you will learn how to design, plan, and execute the right SAP testing strategy for your project to ensure you have a successfully tested SAP solution. The video is divided into the following topics: the testing strategy design, what are the testing needs for your project, and how to manage the testing execution. So let's look at the testing strategy design first. So the first thing you need to determine is what should be tested and how should it be tested. So we have different kinds of standard SAP project tests. We have unit testing, integration testing, also abbreviated SIT as system integration test, or just IT as integration test. User acceptance test, UAT, sometimes called just user test or user result testing, many different names, but the most common one is UAT, user acceptance test. And then we have the final one, which is the stress and performance test. Now this is a little tricky one because in many projects I've worked on, this has not been possible to do because of lack of tools or a decision that this is a test that's not to be included. But these are the standard tests that is in the SAP methodologies. So you need to determine what should be tested. All, a subset, or more than this. Secondly, who will be the testers? So we need to make sure we have allocation of resources, and we might need to recruit resources depending on who you want to do the particular test. Any testing tools available. Is it a manual or automated test execution? This will be critical to determine how much time you need to allocate for your testing. Testing approach. Again, where are we going to do the test? Are we going to be in a physical perimeter of the system itself? Are we going to do remote testing? So what approach are we going to take for executing the test? And then finally, how to document the result of the test and get sign off to the result. And here you need to determine how do you need to document it, what is the documentation requirements, and how will the test be signed off. And this is important. You need to get consensus and acknowledgement that this particular test, which everyone agreed you need to do, has now been completed, and it has been completed successfully. So to summarize the components of the testing strategy design is the unit test, which has the objective to ensure that a particular program or transaction can be executed to a result that is satisfactory, and it's executed in isolation. So by performing this isolated test, you will ensure that each component is set up correctly, developed correctly, and it works as expected. Now after that, you will have an integration test or system integration test, which is the term I like to use. And here you want to make sure that each component works end to end. So the objective is to ensure the overall system performs as designed. And this is by testing, as said, the end-to-end process rather than just the individual transaction and components, which we have done in the unit test. Then once the unit test and the system integration test has been completed successfully, you can go into a user acceptance test. And this is with the objective to ensure that the SAP functionality and the SAP screens, which is showing the new process, meets the user requirements. And they might have changed the requirements, but it's important that here that it has to be measured if it complies with the criteria agreed and approved during the business blueprint design, and which has been documented in the business blueprint design document. And this is with reference to that, we need to make sure that the system complies with this and can be accepted by the users. And this is the users that's doing the test, not the project team, where as the unit test and the system integration test is executed by the project team. And then we have the stress and performance test, and this is a test with the objective to ensure that your system, mainly the technical system, can perform as designed during peak hours, as well as determine what is the maximum capacity of your system. So this test normally is by simulating your transaction or selected transaction by a number of users, a large number of users, using some kind of automated tools that can simulate these users. Now, on many projects I've worked on, this test has been difficult to do because of constraint in what tools is available or the project timeline, and sometimes the test has been skipped and then instead taking other measures to measure the capacity of the system. But if you really want to be sure, you really want to factor this in, and it's something that requires a close interaction between the technical and the functional team. So this is the test landscape, so to speak, on an SAP project. Now, what are the testing needs for your project? Well, again, let's use the charts we've used in the past to try and map the testing needs to the different project phases of the standard SAP project. So you will have, in the very early beginning, you might need to do proof of concept testing of your tools as well as other components. So this is a proof of concept task. And it might also be that you need to do proof of concept of not just the tools, but the infrastructure itself. Does this network connection work? Is it possible for me to place the servers in this data center? The way I'm setting up, is this sufficient, that this system landscape? And of course, I want these tools, and I do a tool selection. So this is in the early stage of the project, during the project preparation, or even before. Doing business blueprint, once you have that signed and you start your configuration, you will go into a unit testing, and this will start from, depending on how early the overlap between business blueprint and realization, but it's business blueprint / realization, you do the unit test. And it's the transactions that you configure, but it's also any configuration, any development that you add to the system. Then you will go into system integration test or integration test. This is to the end-to-end business process testing, and this will happen during realization. After that, you have user acceptance test. It can be all, or normally it's only selected business processes based on criticality. You really want to focus on the customized processes and not the standard SAP process. That part should be low risk. So some projects test everything, some test a subset, some test several cycles, some test an overlap with integration test and UAT to speed up things, to accelerate your schedule. So all three tests is going to normally take place during some part of the realization phase, and the UAT, you really want to try and complete it early on in the final prep. And across these, you need to consider, what about authorizations? Where do I test my user authorization? And minimum, you should test it during your user acceptance test. Preferably, you will test it also during the unit testing and the system integration test. But it tends to be, it's a tedious task, and it tends to be on tight schedules that it is postponed to the very last minute. System and performance testing. This you can basically do as soon as your system is built and ready. And normally you have all your system environments ready during the last part of business blueprint, beginning realization. So this is where you can start executing this. You want the business blueprint to be concluded first, because you want to use those the real business transactions. And normally if you are using customized program, those won't be built until during realization phase. So that's probably where you'll be able to start this with the best result. So that's the testing needs. Now let's try and look at how to manage your testing execution. So first of all, make sure you agree on what tests to be performed and a high-level scope of these tests as part of the project planning. Again, it comes down to your testing strategy. If you're going down the road where you want the system and performance, the stress and performance test, you need to factor that in. If you want to test your authorizations during SIT or your integration test and unit test, you need to factor that in. So you need to make sure you agree in the project planning. What test am I going to do? So you can allocate the resources and the time early on. Also, well before each test, agree on the detailed scope and get a scope sign off. You don't want to sit at the end of the test having different opinions or expectations not aligned what is the successful of the specific test. And it comes down to agree on the test completion criteria. Normally I've seen that you have certain impact, high, medium, low, and the high and medium issues, once they are resolved, all high and medium issues from the test, you can say that the test is successful and you can move on. That doesn't mean that the low issues should not be resolved, but it's kind of like that's the criteria for the success of especially the user acceptance test. Your criteria might be different, but you need to have a set of criteria and you need to agree it with all the stakeholders. Otherwise you get into a mess. And again, track both the test preparation but also the test execution closely. And again, I'm the fan of the tracking sheets for the dedicated activities. So have a tracking sheet. We will have a test plan for you to download. That will also include some tools where you can monitor the completion of your preparation and execution of the test. But if you are so fortunate that you have a test tool available, it can be Solution Manager, it can be some third-party tools, then of course that tools normally also have a test tracking. So make use of that, but keep it simple. Make sure that it is used so that you have a snapshot every week, every day of where you are in your test, depending on how long the test period are. And again, if there is problems during the test, make sure it is raised and recorded. I've seen on project where the functional team and the development team, they just tend to fix it and then they test it again and now it's done. So you don't hear about the issues unless you probe into it. That's the wrong approach. You really should have all issues recorded. Even though it's a quick fix, it takes 2 minutes from the functional person, you need to record it so that you have a chance to improve on it and take proactive measures to ensure these issues or these things missed out doesn't happen, especially if you are going multiple cycles as a global rollout. So make sure there is a culture where all issues are recorded and documented. Once a test is completed, it is completed. No scope change, no rerun. I've seen on projects where people do not agree that a certain project test is completed and therefore you can go in a loop rerunning the same test scenario again and again and again, and you will never end. You need to have a clear completion criteria, and once it's completed, everyone agrees now this particular test is completed, and thereby you don't touch it no more. With that, we will complete this video with a summary that you should now have a good understanding of how you should design, plan, and execute the right SAP testing for your testing strategy for your SAP project. And as always, we are available in the forum, and we will also have a test plan available for you to download. Thank you.